At my husband's funeral, my mother-in-law slapped my 6-year-old son and called him garbage. I stood there in shock, holding him as he cried in my arms. I did not argue, I did not scream. I made one phone call. And within 2 hours, everything changed. They went from insulting us to begging in front of me. My name is Jessica Hayes, and I am 30 years old. The day of my husband's funeral felt unreal, like a nightmare I could not wake up from. The sky was covered with dark clouds and the air felt cold and heavy. People stood around us dressed in black, some whispering quietly, while others just watched in silence. I stood next to my husband's grave, holding my son's small hand tightly. The priest was speaking, saying prayers about peace and endings, but I could barely hear anything. My mind was stuck in the past, trying to understand how everything ended so suddenly. Just a few days ago my husband was sitting beside me smiling, talking about small things and playing with our son. And now I was watching them lower him into the ground. My fingers tightened around my son's hand as he looked up at me with confusion in his eyes. He softly asked, "Mom, why are they putting Dad there?" My chest tightened and I felt like I could not breathe. I bent down and hugged him, trying to stay strong. I told him, "Dad is resting," even though saying those words felt like breaking my own heart. He looked at me again and said, "I want him to come home." Tears filled my eyes, but I quickly wiped them away. I had to stay strong because now I was all he had. The sound of soil falling onto the coffin felt like something inside me closing forever. When it was over, people slowly started leaving. Some came to me and said things like, "Stay strong," or "He is in a better place." But their words felt empty and distant. I could not respond, I could barely even stand. Then I looked toward my in-laws. They were standing at a distance, near the grave, just watching. My mother-in-law cried for a moment, but something about it did not feel real. My father-in-law stood still with no expression at all. The rest of the family looked cold and distant. And in that moment a painful truth came to my mind. They never accepted me. No matter how much I tried, it was never enough for them. And my son, they never truly accepted him either. Even at their own son's funeral, they felt like strangers. A strange fear slowly settled in my heart. How will I live with them now? That question stayed in my mind as we got into the cars. The drive back home was silent and uncomfortable. No one spoke, not even once. My son sat quietly beside me, holding my hand tightly. When we reached the house, the gates opened slowly, and we all walked inside. Relatives and guests were already sitting in the living room waiting. As we entered, all eyes turned toward us, and the room became completely silent. I felt that same uncomfortable feeling again, like I did not belong there. I looked at my in-laws. They walked inside calmly, as if nothing had happened. No tears, no emotions, just cold expressions. I tried to ignore it, and told myself this is not the time. I just needed to get through this moment. My son slowly looked around the room. Then his eyes stopped at something. It was his father's photo placed on a table, surrounded by flowers. He slowly walked toward it, and stood in front of it quietly. I did not stop him. He reached out his small hand and picked up the frame. He softly said, "Dad." My heart started to ache again. But before I could move, the frame slipped from his hand. It fell to the ground and shattered. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the entire room. Everything went silent. My son stepped back, shocked and scared. His eyes filled with tears. He said, "I am sorry," in a trembling voice, and then suddenly, a loud slap echoed in the room. The sound of that slap hit harder than anything else in that room. My son's small face turned to the side, and he held his cheek in pain. For a moment I froze, I could not breathe, I could not think. Then I slowly looked up. It was her. My mother-in-law standing right in front of him with anger on her face. The entire room was silent. No one moved, no one spoke. My son started crying softly. That was the moment something inside me broke. I rushed toward him and pulled him into my arms. I held him tightly and whispered, "It is okay, you are safe." But my own voice was shaking. I looked at his face and saw the red mark on his cheek. That moment burned into my heart. I lifted my eyes and looked straight at her. I asked, "Why did you slap him?" My voice was low but trembling. "He is just a child." She did not hesitate. She did not feel guilty. She looked at me and said coldly, "He is garbage." For a second I thought I heard wrong. I asked what, but she continued, "He ruined my son's life." My grip around my child tightened. I said, "How can you say that? He is your grandson." Before she could reply, another voice came from behind. "She is right. I turned and saw my sister-in-law walking forward. Her arms were crossed, and her face was full of arrogance. She said, "You brought nothing but bad luck into this house." My heart sank deeper.
She continued saying, "I always knew this would happen. The moment you entered this house, everything started falling apart." Tears rolled down my face. I said softly, "I trusted you. I thought you were my family." She laughed. A cold, mocking laugh. She said, "Family, do not insult that word." The room filled with whispers. People were watching like it was some kind of show. Then my father-in-law stepped forward. His presence made everything even more silent. He said calmly, but with clear hatred, "We made a mistake bringing you into this house." Every word felt like a blade. He continued, "We cannot accept a middle-class woman in our family." Some people in the room started laughing quietly. I stood there frozen, holding my crying son, humiliated in front of everyone. My son buried his face in my chest. He whispered, "Mom, I am sorry." That broke me completely. I quickly said, "No, it is not your fault." But they did not stop. They kept going. Insults, accusations, harsh words. They said, "You brought nothing here. You were never one of us. You and your son are just a burden." Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. No one defended me. No one stood for us. They just watched. My heart felt like it was being crushed, but slowly something changed inside me. The pain started turning into something else. Something cold. Something strong. I slowly wiped my tears. And for the first time, I looked at them without fear, without begging, just calm. I asked, "Are you done?" They stopped, surprised. My mother-in-law looked at me with anger. She said, "Pack your things and leave this house." My father-in-law added, "There is no place for beggars here." The room became silent again. I looked around at every face, every person who watched my humiliation. Then I looked at my son, still holding me tightly, still crying. I took a deep breath and said, "Fine." My voice was calm, stronger than before. For a moment they looked confused. Maybe they expected me to cry, to beg, to argue. But I did none of that. Instead, I reached into my pocket, took out my phone, and dialed a number. The room stayed silent. They watched me, confused and annoyed. I put the phone to my ear and said softly, "I need you to come. It is time." Then I ended the call and looked at them again. This time there were no tears in my eyes, only something they did not understand yet, something that was about to change everything. The room stayed completely silent after my call, and everyone kept staring at me with confusion and irritation on their faces. My mother-in-law crossed her arms and asked in a cold tone, "Who did you just call?" But I did not answer her, and simply stood there holding my son close to me. A few minutes passed, and the whispers slowly started again as people began making assumptions about what I was trying to do. Some of them quietly laughed and said who would even come for her, while others just shook their heads as if I had already lost. My father-in-law looked at me with frustration and said, "This is pointless, just take your things and leave this house." But I still did not move and did not respond. Time started passing slowly, and the tension in the room kept increasing with every minute that went by. Almost an hour had passed, and now even my mother-in-law looked slightly uneasy, although she tried to hide it behind her anger. She said this drama is getting boring and turned her face away as if none of this mattered anymore. And then suddenly, the main door opened. The sound was clear enough to make everyone turn at once, and all eyes shifted toward the entrance. Two men walked inside calmly and confidently, as if they already knew exactly why they were there. One of them was holding a file in his hand, and the other looked around the room with a serious and professional expression. They did not greet anyone, and did not hesitate even for a second. Instead, they walked straight into the center of the room and stopped right in front of everyone. My father-in-law immediately stepped forward and asked in a sharp tone, "Who are you?" The man holding the file looked at him calmly and said, "We are here regarding Mr. Adrien's will." The moment he said that, the entire room went silent again, but this time the silence felt different. It felt heavy and uncomfortable, like something unexpected was about to happen. My father-in-law quickly replied with confidence that there must be some mistake, because we already know everything. The The man slightly nodded and said, "I suggest you listen carefully before making any assumptions." Something in his voice made everyone uneasy. He opened the file slowly and began reading in a clear and steady tone. He said, "According to the legal will, all movable and immovable assets are to be transferred entirely." Before he could continue, my mother-in-law frowned and my sister-in-law looked confused. The man continued without stopping and said, "All business ownership and all financial accounts have also been transferred." Then he paused for a moment and looked up. And finally, he said, "Everything has been transferred to his son." For a few seconds, no one reacted, as if their minds could not process what they had just heard. Then suddenly my father-in-law raised his voice and said, "That is impossible. There must be a mistake." My sister-in-law quickly added, "This cannot be true." My mother-in-law stepped forward and asked with a slightly shaking voice, "When was this will made?" The man calmly flipped the page and answered, "It was prepared 1 month before his death." Their expressions changed instantly from confidence to confusion and then to fear. My father-in-law said, "We were never informed about this." The man looked directly at him and replied, "That is because it was kept confidential." At that moment, my mother-in-law slowly turned toward me. Her voice was no longer strong as she asked, "Did you know about this?" I took a step forward and said yes. The room froze again. This time, everyone was looking only at me. Tears filled my eyes, but I did not look weak anymore. I looked straight at them and said, "Your son knew everything." Their faces tightened as they listened. I continued and said, "He knew how you were stealing money from his business." No one spoke. I said, "He knew how you were secretly giving that money to your other children." My sister-in-law's face turned pale. I continued, "He knew that you never truly loved him and that you only cared about his money." The room was completely silent. I looked down at my son and then back at them. And I said, "He also knew that if something ever happened to him, you would treat us exactly like this." Tears rolled down my face, but my voice remained steady. I said, "That is why he protected us." 1 month before his death, he transferred everything to his son. And he made me his legal guardian. The truth settled over the room like a storm, and for the first time no one had anything to say. My mother-in-law slowly stepped back as if the ground beneath her feet was no longer stable. She shook her head in disbelief and whispered, "This cannot be true." My father-in-law looked completely shaken and tried to gather himself, but his voice had already lost its strength. He said, "You are lying," but even he did not sound convinced anymore. I calmly looked at him and then shifted my eyes toward the same woman who had just slapped my child. In a steady voice, I said, "You just slapped the owner." Those words hit harder than anything that had happened before. This time no one laughed. No one whispered. The entire room was filled with a heavy silence. My mother-in-law's eyes widened as fear slowly replaced her anger. My sister-in-law looked down, unable to even meet my eyes. My father-in-law stood frozen, as if everything he believed in had just collapsed in front of him. And then everything changed. The same people who were insulting us just moments ago started stepping closer with nervous expressions. Their voices were no longer loud or arrogant. They became soft, desperate, and uncertain. My mother-in-law spoke first and said, "We did not mean what we said." My sister-in-law quickly added, "You misunderstood everything." My father-in-law tried to control the situation and said, "We were just upset because of the loss." But their words meant nothing now. I stood there quietly holding my son's hand. The same child they called garbage. The same child they humiliated. The same child they slapped. And now they were standing in front of him, asking for forgiveness. I did not respond immediately. I just looked at each one of them carefully. Every face that once looked down on me was now filled with fear and regret. Then I took a slow breath and said only one word. "Leave." My voice was calm but firm. There was no anger in it.
No shouting.
Just a clear decision. And this time they had no power left to argue. No authority left to control anything. They stood there in silence, realizing that everything had slipped out of their hands. Within days, everything was legally transferred. The house, the business, and every asset was now under my son's name. And I was his legal guardian. They had no choice but to leave. The same house where they once insulted me now belonged to the child they called garbage. After they were gone, the house felt completely different. For the first time, it felt peaceful, safe, like a place where we could finally breathe. I sat beside my son and held him close. I gently told him, "You are safe now." He looked at me with innocent eyes and slowly smiled. And in that moment, I realized something. They thought they had the power to break us, but they never knew that everything already belonged to us. The same people who were insulting us just moments ago started stepping closer with nervous expressions. Their voices were no longer loud or arrogant. They became soft, desperate, and uncertain. My mother-in-law spoke first and said we did not mean what we said. My sister-in-law quickly added, "You misunderstood everything." My father-in-law tried to control the situation and said we were just upset because of the loss. But their words meant nothing now. I stood there quietly holding my son's hand. The same child they called garbage. The same child they humiliated. The same child they slapped. And now they were standing in front of him, asking for forgiveness. I did not respond immediately. I just looked at each one of them carefully. Every face that once looked down on me was now filled with fear and regret. Then I took a slow breath and said only one word: "Leave." My voice was calm but firm. There was no anger in it.
No shouting.
Just a clear decision. And this time they had no power left to argue. No authority left to control anything. They stood there in silence, realizing that everything had slipped out of their hands. Within days, everything was legally transferred. The house, the business, and every asset was now under my son's name. And I was his legal guardian. They had no choice but to leave. The same house where they once insulted me now belonged to the child they called garbage. After they were gone, the house felt completely different. For the first time, it felt peaceful, safe, like a place where we could finally breathe. I sat beside my son and held him close. I gently told him, "You are safe now." He looked at me with innocent eyes and slowly smiled. And in that moment, I realized something. They thought they had the power to break us, but they never knew that everything already belonged to us. They called him garbage, but they never knew he owned everything. Honestly, if I were in that situation, I would have done the same thing, because some people only understand respect when they lose power. What would you do if someone insulted your child like this in front of everyone? Would you stay silent or fight back? Tell me in the comments, backhand index pointing down.